We ready? I'd like to call this meeting of the School District Budget Committee to order. I ask that you please all rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and I would ask that Amanda lead us this time. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you and good evening. Tonight we're going to be discussing warrant articles and having a work session. Before we get started, I do have to do that phone call thing. So hopefully it will go over swimmingly. Actually, I'll leave that off. All right. New call. 9. Hello, Carol.
Hello.
Are you there?
Yes, as far as I know.
Okay, I'll be right back to you. I got to get the other person on. All right?
Is Ginger there?
Then I'll do the, well, we'll find out later.
I keep track of that.
Maybe she's not available tonight.
Hi, you've reached Mackenzie Murphy's cell phone. I am unable to come to the phone at this time. However, if you would please leave your name, number,
Yeah, leave it on the whole
and
meeting.
voice message, I will return your call as soon as I can. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
At the tone, please record your message. When you've finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
Mackenzie, it's Stan Heinrich. We got a budget committee meeting tonight, and I was calling you. If you get this message and can participate, please call me on my cell phone or send me a text, and I will try to get you back online. Thank you much. Bye-bye. Carol, are you still there? Okay. Carol, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. So far, it's just you tonight, and I got to go through the questions. Where are you?
Satellite Beach, Florida.
And is there anybody with you?
Just Ginger, and I was racking my brain the other day thinking about how could I find a way to put a video camera on Ginger so she'd look like she was part of the meeting.
Okay. Tonight, we're doing warrant articles, and we're going to be having a work session. So listen up, and if you've got some questions, you know what to do.
Yep.
We are only dealing with moneyed warrant articles. If it doesn't have money in it, the Budget Committee doesn't discuss or vote on it. Articles 1 and 2 are not moneyed warrant articles. Article 3, Matthew, you want to come on up and let you present warrant Article 3? And this, just for people at home, is for a labor agreement with the Merrimack Teachers Association. And Matthew will discuss the numbers and stuff, and then we'll get into questions and answers.
Yep, thank you. This was after negotiations with the Merrimack Teachers Association and the Merrimack School Board. The negotiations went very well. Like to say that the teachers really negotiated in good faith, as did the board. The term of the agreement is 3 years. When we started researching area school districts, Amherst, Bedford, even Milford, other districts around us, we found out that we were lower on the scale than all of them. Not by just a little, but by a considerable margin. So, and we also compared health insurance, and we found out our 8515 is more than other districts are contributing to their health insurance. So we were out of balance with the health insurance contribution. The teachers are paying more than other districts, and we were out of balance with our rate of pay in order to keep and retain good teachers. So in this 3-year agreement, the first year is 1920, it's $855,000. Year 2 is 2021, it's $883,000. And year 21-22 is $911,000. This includes New Hampshire retirement, workers' comp, unemployment, LTD, FICA, everything. So this number is fully loaded. And it maintains the current percentage that the teachers pay towards their health insurance. District pays 85, teachers pay 15% of the plan. And it also includes a 3.25% pay increase over the 3 years. So each year, 3.25%. We worked with the bargaining unit, and we looked at the wage scale in comparison to those around us. And what we did is we kind of funded more money at the bottom of the scale in order to attract teachers. And so that's where, not the majority, but that's where a significant amount was aimed towards, to attract those teachers coming out of college. And then as it went upwards, the rate of pay diminished. So the high end could be 4%, and the low end, I think, would be like 1.5% for somebody at the top of the scale. So it averages out 3.25%. It's not an automatic 3.25% per person. So that's what we agreed upon, and that's what we thought would be palatable to the voters, and that's what we thought would be a good agreement for the teachers to start to get them where they should be. Merrimack historically has paid less than other districts, but we make up for it in the supports we provide, the professional development we provide, and the overall attitude and tenor of the district and what it's like to work in Merrimack. We like to make everybody feel like they have a place here and they have a home here and they could stay here for a very long time and have a successful career. So that is the teacher contract warrant article in a nutshell.
You had mentioned earlier about contributions by employees in the district. What is the new percentage on the contribution?
What is the what?
For the health insurance, you had talked about the 8515?
Yes. It remains the same.
It's the same?
Yes.
Okay, fine, I just wanted to make...
Because
Because you said it was different than other towns.
Oh, it is. Some towns it's 90-10. Some towns, school districts, it's even 95-5, depending upon the plan. So we left it at 85-15 for the duration of this contract, because there are other groups like the support staff group who are paying, I think, 89-11, and so the teachers are paying the most out of all the groups that we have. So
Okay.
there's some disparity. So I think, I don't want to talk for the board, but I think long-term goal would be to get everybody on the same level playing field, so get the other groups that we have over time down to where the teachers are, and then perhaps take it from there, but that's just my speculation of a future
Okay.
strategy, that's all.
And we're going to start off with questions. Brian, you're first.
So you gave the comparison to Amherst and Bedford. Do you have a comparison to state average in terms of pay rates?
State average, not off the top of my head, I wouldn't want to say that. I think we're probably in the lower middle tier as far as state average goes, but I would have to take a look at that to be sure.
Kevin?
So I have a question specific to the contract and the issue of how the raises would be handed out. Is there anything that's merit-based? I know-
No, there is no merit
Right.
base.
So I guess a follow-up question is that, and maybe this is for somebody in the back row, about 6 years ago, I joined a committee to work on, the Teacher Evaluation Committee, to work on a system that would come up with a process to evaluate teachers. The thought process was that that would eventually get incorporated into these contracts. So I'd like an update on that. How is that progressing? Is it being used? That sort of thing.
Well, the teacher evaluation model was worked on for a couple of years.
Right.
And it's in place right now. I know training has occurred as far as how to negotiate that and how to present it fairly with the teachers and the domains that you choose and everything, but it has not been incorporated into a merit-based pay system.
And are there plans to do so at any point?
I would look to stage left and at my esteemed board member, and maybe that's for another negotiation period, but not for this one that we're right at right now. I can't say. But Mark is here, and
Somebody's
Mark
coming
will-
here to save the day.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
He was on the committee, so he would
Kevin
know.
and I worked on that committee
Yeah.
together for a long time. So Matt accurately described, the status of that implementation. It's been a game changer for the way that we evaluate teachers in the district. It's evidence-based, as you know, and it's provided an opportunity for very targeted growth for all teachers. And it's been a real tool to provide leverage for teachers to seek improvement where necessary and to seek extensions where they've already achieved a certain level of proficiency, and so how to move them forward. So I think universally, the leadership team would say that it has moved the dial a lot, moved the needle a lot in the favor of advancing teachers' skills across the range of their responsibilities. Merit has not been something that has been included in any discussion up to this point, and I can't speak for the future, but for right now, it is not part of the equation.
So just to clarify, so there is no financial incentive for a teacher to perform at the highest level of that, on that rubric versus the adequate level?
The way that, well, no, there's no financial incentive. The way that we have operated in Merrimack for a very long time is to insist on excellence as a matter of course, and to expect that teachers will perform to their optimal, which is their responsibility. And so this tool that we have put in place has provided an opportunity to be very specific about evidence that we can point to show where improvement has been made or improvement needs to be made. And we consider teaching in Merrimack a privilege. And so we have really found, and this is, I think, all the members of the leadership team would say, we found an opportunity for real growth, real dialogue, real improvement. And so that's where we are at the moment.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Carol, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Matt will know the answer right off the top of his head, but can you give me approximately what a teacher's salary fresh out of school would be versus one nearing retirement?
Well, one nearing retirement, if you're looking at, let's say, a PhD, probably around $74,000 at the top end. And then one coming out of school, bachelor's degree, no experience. We try and hire masters with, a master's degree for a teacher, but you're looking at around maybe $35,000, $36,000 top.
Okay. One thing, and unfortunately, because of the way the system works, we are not involved in the contract negotiations, so all we can do is vote to approve or disapprove, so there's not much I can do, but I'm a little concerned about the 1% as they get more experience, because I feel like, in a way, we're not rewarding our most experienced teachers, and I don't know if I'm missing something in that equation. There's really nothing I can do about it anyway, but it just concerns me a little bit that our most experienced teachers, if they're only getting a 1% raise, that has to be somewhat discouraging.
Well, I think I said 1.5 maybe at the top end of the scale if you're going from year to year. But there are adjustment periods. There was an adjustment period several years ago where you got to the middle of the salary scale and then you were just stagnant for 3 years. I think in that area, probably after the 4th year, you just went year 5, you got maybe 1% and everything was compressed. We took care of that years ago, and now it's time to add money at the front end of the chart to get people in. Next negotiation, maybe there'll be a correction on the upper end, on the top side. It all depends. You're talking about 345 teachers, an institution that's been around forever. It's nothing that you can really steer the helm on the ship too quickly. So this was one of the areas we wanted to focus on, and with the agreement of the teachers, they chose to go with stressing getting new people in here and lightening the load at the top a little bit in favor of that. So that just wasn't a board decision, that was an MTA decision too.
Do you know off the top of your head about, I don't know whether it would be, whether you state it as an average age or an average number of years of experience, but about when do our teachers typically retire?
Average age of retirees, I probably would say maybe around 62, 63 perhaps. In order to get the retirement incentive, you still have to be here for 15 years in the district. So, yeah, probably around in the 60s, I would say. But then again, if we need them as substitutes, they come back from time to time. So, it's a good resource for us to have also, because they're familiar with the lay of the land and the classroom and our methods and how everything goes. So, I think I saw Jenny Crook here today, and Jenny retired a few years ago at the age of, I think, 70. So, and it was a sad day to see her go. But, so I think that's probably around the average age, but that's just a guess from me.
All right, that makes me feel a little bit better, because what I was concerned was that we weren't getting teachers who, and I'll just pull a number out of thin air, but let's say in their early 50s, who have a lot of experience but still have a potential to teach for quite a few number of years, very effectively. And I didn't want to see us disincentivizing them and having them just move on to other districts. So it sounds like we're keeping them most of their working life, so I feel a little bit better about it.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen, Marge would know better than I, but I've looked at the paperwork too. I don't think I've seen anybody in their mid-50s, because I think you have to be at least 55 for the retirement incentive, but a lot of people retire without it too, sometimes, if they want to, and circumstance dictates. but I haven't seen anybody mid-50s retire. I can't remember if I've ever seen one, so.
Okay, that I think mostly addresses my concern.
Okay, thank you, Carol. I saw somebody else with it. Chuck?
Matt, can you tell us what a four-year teaching degree costs at UNH or Keene State?
UNH tuition, when my daughter was going there, in-state, not living on campus, was around $18,000 a year, so you probably add another. Yeah, it's probably around $30,000, so you're looking at $120,000 perhaps. In-state tuition at UNH or Keene, it's expensive.
So it's about $120,000
Yeah,
investment to
Yes, it
become
is.
a teacher right out of college.
Correct.
And what kind of probationary period does that teacher experience before they can be invited to a continuing contract?
The law used to be 3 years, it's 5 now.
So it's 5 years before you have the security of knowing that you have a continuing contract in the teaching industry.
Yeah, after your 5th year, if you go through the performance evaluation cycle and you're found to be deficient, and let's say you can be put on a performance improvement plan, you've got 6 months to deal with that and to see if you can right the ship. But anytime during that first 5 years, we could non-renew a teacher for, no reason whatsoever.
So it's really a 5-year probationary period
Absolutely.
before the stability of being a continuing contract teacher takes place.
Yes, sir.
Could you please tell me what, at that point, tenure is or is not, as considered by the public?
As considered by the public?
Public generally thinks of tenure as having job security forever.
Well, no, it's not job security forever. I mean, you can be terminated. If you have tenure, let's say you have 10 years in, all that means is you have to be terminated for just cause. Like right now, if you have 4 years in, we could just say, thank you very much, we're not renewing your contract. Have a nice day, we wish you well. No reason, nothing. After 5 years, we have to, if you commit something that's heinous enough, we can terminate you on the spot. But if it's a performance issue, then we have to give you an opportunity to work your way through that performance issue, have a performance improvement plan, which is written by the employee and the administrator and a group of other people, and then during that performance period, you're evaluated every X amount of weeks to see how you're doing on your particular issue and how things are progressing, everything like that. And if you fail to complete the plan, then after that, oh, hi, I thought you were going to come up to the mic and help me out. Then after that, you can be terminated.
So there is no tenure.
In essence, if you define tenure as you have a job for life, regardless if you mail in your work or not, the answer is no. That's correct.
Now, on top of those specific evaluations for performance that are given with the intention of remediating weak areas and so forth, we have over and above that, as was discussed earlier, a teacher evaluation system that is apparently bearing some fruit.
Yes, correct. Yes, absolutely. Because the whole idea is to not, the evaluation system was built in conjunction with administration and the teachers in order to not get to that point. That's the whole thing behind it. They have a piece of it, you have a piece of it. It's kind of a joint process where you work on your weaknesses and you try and correct those and you try and become better in certain areas. So the whole goal of that model, and that evaluation model, and the work that was done with that committee over the 2-year period, I believe, was to get to that point that you need a remediation plan as defined in the RSAs, because it is defined in the RSAs.
So in terms of teacher supply and school district demand, where does it stand in terms of people seeking jobs and districts seeking to fill those jobs?
I think right now the demand is equal with the supply. There are certain critical shortage areas I do know about. I don't know what the latest list is. I haven't seen that from the DOE. They usually put out a list. A lot of it revolves around speech pathologists, special ed teachers, special ed coordinators, everything like that. So there is shortage areas. We are looking for a few who are trained in that area, but overall, I wouldn't say there is a critical shortage across the board in Merrimack or probably in the state right now. We're doing well. We're doing okay.
So anecdotally, there isn't a large supply of teachers banging on the doors to get jobs across New Hampshire.
No, sir. There is not.
And would you offer some consideration as to why that might be so?
Why that might be so? Well,
I mean, they've invested $120,000,
okay,
and they've got to be hung on a string for 5 years
Yeah.
before they know whether they're going to be able to stay or not. And then they do have extensive evaluation performance requirements that they must succeed addressing, and so on. I guess I'm saying it's not easy to be a teacher for that kind of investment.
Well, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort to get through. You have to, pass the Praxis 1 and 2. That's a test that they didn't have 20 years ago. You have to get your certification. That's another hoop. And I hear there's all sorts of different rules going on as far as kind of tightening up and making that more restrictive and more rigorous. And then you get your teaching job and you're making mid-30s, which is you're going to have a hard time paying off that $120,000 college debt. So from a standpoint of monetary gain and payback, it's not the best choice, but I don't think people who teach go into it for that reason. Nobody's going to become wealthy becoming a teacher. You want to work at HP and be a software engineer or something like that. So, but I think they do it because they love the work and they enjoy the camaraderie and they enjoy it once they get here. But it's it's something. It's an area that's really challenging when you think of it as a career path, and you really have to be dedicated by other reasons than just a financial gain.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Thanks.
Amanda?
I'm wondering how many steps are on the pay scale and how many teachers are at the top of the pay scale. Are they getting a raise if they're at the very top and they've been there for years?
Yeah, there's 18 steps on the pay chart. It starts, that's going down this way. You start off with bachelor's plus 15, and you kind of go across the top that way. And last time I looked, there were, we have very few teachers at the top of the scale who just have bachelor's degrees only. They're more on the right-hand side. And it's kind of located in that area. There's a lot of them on the upper right-hand part of the scale, and then there's a lot kind of in the lower portion of the scale, the way they fit when you put them on a little scattergram, so to speak.
So if it's the way I'm familiar with the teacher scale, each step is 1 year of experience. So how many teachers do you have that are 18-year experienced or plus? are they getting a pay raise if they're at the
Yes,
top?
yes, they are. Because each year there's a different pay scale. And so it's not like they just go up a step, they go to a new scale. They're still on step 18, but they go to from the 2019, 2020 scale to a 2020, 2021 scale. So they would get that nominal increase if they were at the top.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Jordan?
I just have a quick question. Regardless of how we vote on this warrant article, I just want some explanation as to the fact that this was a contract reached between the school board and the teachers union,
Teachers Association.
teachers association.
Yes.
So what happens when it goes to as a warrant article to the community and they vote? What happens if they don't support it? Does it not happen? Do they not get this increase, or what's the?
Well, if you flip the page and you go to Article 4, that's a non-monetary article. So basically that says if the teacher contract fails, it allows the school board to get together with the Teachers Association and renegotiate a contract that's more palatable to the voters, find out what their issues were, renegotiate a contract, and hold one special meeting. And we would go through the budget process, we would have the Budget Committee public hearing, we would have another deliberative session, we would have another vote. So if the article failed, they would go to use the option in 4. Now, if 4 failed, so if you had a failed contract, period, then the teachers would not get any increase. They would stay on the 2018-2019 contract, and they would stay, if they're on step 5, they stay on step 5. They don't move. They're
And that's-
frozen.
That's normal operating procedure for these kinds of things.
If a contract fails and you're in Nashua, like they do all the time, yes, that's correct.
Well, more specifically to this, what I'm asking is the contingency that the town needs to vote and approve it is the ultimate acceptance of that contract.
Oh,
In other-
absolutely,
okay.
yes, yeah, absolutely. That's why they're out there, and that's why they're, 3 years, you've got to disclose the 3 years. It's called, I don't want to bore you, I'll bore you with it. It's called sandburnizing the contract. So the money that's in here goes in the default budget the next year. So we don't have to raise it again. It's 3 years and done.
And one last thing. So, and the amounts we're seeing, just for clarification, that's the increase amount.
Yep.
That we're not looking at all here about the total contract with the Teachers Association or anything like that. We're really just looking at this increased amount
Yes. That's
based
correct.
on expected.
Based on the people we have in place at the time that we negotiated the contract. So you've got people, you're going to have people who retire, so it all depends upon who was in the scattergram or in the contract at the time.
All right. Amanda, do you have a question?
I do, yeah. So if the warrant Article 3 fails and you have to renegotiate, is there a cost to the taxpayers for having to hire a neutral person to kind of lead the negotiations?
Well, we wouldn't necessarily hire anybody. That's if you go to like arbitration, you have to hire a mediator, and there is a cost associated with that. But I think that this is something that, seeing we're not in the habit of doing that or hiring outside experts to come in and do our negotiating for us, the only cost would be people's time.
Okay, thank you.
Stan has been temporarily indisposed, and so I am going to continue the meeting. We have more questions on Article 3. This is a great opportunity. Yes, Brian?
Mine isn't actually so much a question as to pick up on what Kevin was asking earlier in talking about the 1.5% increase for the top step. I just wanted to kind of point out for the record that that is less than the rate of inflation. So in real dollar terms, that's actually a paid decrease for those top teachers. So I just kind of want to point that out for the record before any voting happens of sounds like the teachers have been very generous in their negotiation in this contract.
Any other remarks, considerations, observations? I would just like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that the teachers are where education takes place. They are the fundamental core asset in our students learning the things necessary to be complete people and to compete in life. I do believe that the negotiations between the school board and the teachers union have been described correctly and favorably. And I suppose, I don't know what Stan had in mind, but I would call for us to hear a motion to support this warrant article or not. We have a motion.
Wait for Pat to get back.
I don't think we can probably do that.
To wait?
Well, then, considering the circumstances, let's have a 5-minute recess. All right, I'm going to call the meeting back to order. And I'm going to take the executive privilege of changing the order to discuss the next moneyed article, to give the chairman a little bit more of an opportunity to take care of his distraction. So that will be Article 5. Special warrant Article 5. Shall the district raise and appropriate an amount up to $200,000, said sum not to exceed 10% of the unencumbered surplus funds remaining at the end of fiscal year 2018-2019, and to transfer that amount to the school district repair capital reserve fund previously established for the purpose of providing unanticipated and/or emergency repairs to all school district facilities. Recommended by the school board 500.
Can I ask?
Mr.
Oh, sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
Why is it a special warrant article as opposed to just a warrant article?
Special warrant, I'm glad you asked that question. Special warrant articles are warrant articles that raise money or take money away from a capital reserve account. Special warrant articles are warrant articles by petition. And special warrant articles are warrant articles such as bonds that are a multi-year arrangement. So that's why it's called special warrant article, because there's a capital reserve fund involved.
So, Mr. Chevanel, if you would, give us your usual thorough background, considering all these administrative tasks. This one, I'm sure, is particularly interesting relative to the bat problem that we previously experienced. So, if you would just give us the overview, please.
Yes, this fund basically is for emergency repairs, emergency situations that we sometimes find ourselves in. The last time we dipped into this fund, it was around $225,000 to take care of a little issue of bats over at the James Mastrocola Upper Elementary School, where we had to tear down walls and get in there and disinfect everything and debat. Well, there weren't any bats there. There was only a few. Somebody showed me, when everybody hears about bats in the news, I always get the article thrust in front of my face. There's a school district down in Louisiana that has actual live bats in their schools, and they had a picture of them up in the soffits just kind of hanging out. We didn't have that situation. We just had the leftover of the bats being there and habitating in that area that we had to clean up. So we took $225,000 from this fund last year, and then this year we're going to be taking $110,000 from the fund to take care of the switch gear that's in the high school that we're going to be replacing. And so that leaves around $5,000 left in the fund. And we're looking to replace this with $200,000 to bring it back up, to take the money from surplus that would go back to reduce the taxes, take it from surplus, and then put it in capital reserve again for whenever or wherever the next emergency is going to be. We created this fund, I don't know, probably 12, 13 years ago maybe. We've used it a couple of times. Aside from the bat issue, we hadn't touched it probably in around 6 years, but emergencies are things such that you know not when they happen, and that's why it's there. And I'm glad we had it there last year, along with the grant money we got from the state, $180,000 worth of grant money that we got from the state in order to offset the cost of the bat remediation problem. So this is just to replenish that money from surplus remaining at the end of the year 2018, 2019. And the wording and amount up to, that's a DRA legal term that you have to put, because you have to have a sum certain. So the worst it'll be is $200,000. It won't be any more than that. But if we have a fund, if we only have a fund balance of $100,000, then only $10,000 would go in that fund. So it can't be any more than $200,000. But if fund balance is lower than a certain amount, it'll be the percentage instead. So that's kind of the history of this article and why we're looking to replenish the funds.
Questions from the board? Yes, Lee.
So you're saying up to 10% of whatever's left over
200,000 is the cap.
is the cap.
Or if the fund balance is less than 2 million, let's
2
say
million.
it's $1.5 million,
Right.
10%, it would be 150,000.
Do we typically see a fund balance?
Yes.
Okay.
We've historically had a fund balance of $3 million out of a $78 million, both on the revenue side combined with appropriations. So we've been hovering around that point. Last year we were around $2.9 million. So
So
some-
200,000 wouldn't be an unreasonable ask for that.
I don't believe so.
Right.
No.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Brian, go ahead.
Without the capital reserve fund, in the event of a contingency like the bat situation, how would that be addressed if the capital reserve fund is not replenished?
If the
Or
capital
were not.
reserve fund wasn't replenished and we didn't have that to draw upon, and let's say we had another issue that was, let's say, the bat remediation issue was 600,000. So getting money from the state and getting money from this fund certainly helped out. But if not, we would have to look to see what we had in our budget, and depending upon the time of year, freeze the budget, meaning no expenditures, no field trips. I mean, districts have done that before. They look to areas that they could cut back on and try and find the money there. If you couldn't find the money, you'd have to go for a deficit appropriation. That means you're going in the red. In order to do that, you have to get approval from the school board, and the school board has to, with the superintendent's authority and signature, petition the Commissioner of Education in order to have a deficit appropriation to make that up on the next vote around. So that's something that has been done in the past, not here, but it has been done in other districts. It's something I would definitely like to avoid.
Or Brian, it'd be a big bake sale. Start cooking.
Matt, for the general public, $3 million surplus sounds like a very large number. Could you please explain the necessity of a healthy fund balance?
Oh, thank you. When you have a budget of $78 million, you're spending basically 98, 99% of your operating budget. And when you go through your audit, you have a set of financials that are put together by a CPA. We have excellent CPAs. Plotzik and Sanderson is our current one. Before that, we had Melanson and Heath, very well-known firms, very large firms in the state of New Hampshire. And they put together our financials, and then the financials are sent to Moody's and S&P and everybody like that, all the financial institutions. And what they look at is they look at what your fund balance is at the end of the year, and they use that as an indicator of your financial health and well-being, just like you were putting a stock prospectus together for shareholders. If you have the means and the liquidity to meet your obligations when you go out to borrow long-term, it helps you out with your bond rating. It makes things a lot easier, and if you're, constantly in that level that you do have a fund balance, everybody feels a lot better about lending you money long-term, and it just paints a better picture of the school district as a whole. It also affects the town of Merrimack, because if the town of Merrimack goes for a bond issue for anything, we have to report on their application what our historical fund balance has been over the years. So if we were running close to zero, or we ran in the red, or we were running maybe $200,000 or something like that, which is really minuscule, that's saying that come an emergency time, you may not have the money, therefore who are you going to look to? You're going to look to the town. So it can affect the town's bond rating or the Merrimack Village District's bond rating too, because if they have a bond, we have to fill out the financial information for them also. So it's just not us, it's the whole town of Merrimack, including the MVD. So that's why we like to keep a reasonable, and this is reasonable for the size budget we have, fund balance every year, and all of it goes back to reduce taxes, so it's not being held. I know the town of Merrimack probably holds $6 to $7 million worth of fund balance. They can retain theirs. We cannot, but they retain it for a very good reason, in case of emergencies, and in case of they meet the liquidity needs, or in case they put out the tax bills and only 60% of the people pay the taxes on time. So now they're looking for cash. So they need that fund balance to shore up everything. So it's good for us. It's good for the town. It's good for the MVD for us to have a healthy but reasonable fund balance, and I think that's what we've done over the years.
Any other questions?
Chuck, may I make a comment?
Oh, yes, Carol.
I've been doing this long enough that I remember when we did not have a capital reserve fund for this, and the end result was occasional spikes in the budget, which then reflected into the tax rate. And part of the goal of this is to stabilize the tax rate so that people's property tax bills, although inevitably they're going to go up, but it's at a stable rate. There's no unforeseen spikes, and I think this has been a very successful program to try and maintain the budget at as close to a level as we can.
Thank you, Carol. That's actually a very good point that Carol has made. That capital reserve funds, although difficult under the rules that govern school districts as compared to towns, nevertheless are very smart administrative tools to smooth out the experience of capital improvements and other perhaps unforeseen contingencies that arise from time to time. And it keeps the operation stable, and everybody's happy when it's stable. Any other questions? Yes, Lee.
So you say there was 225 last year for the bat remediation, another 110 this year for the switchgear, and we're looking to put about 200 back. Where would you like to see that number be? Obviously, probably more is better in case of an emergency, but where would we like to level out? 200,000 this year? Are we going to ask for another 100,000 next year, or where do we kind of cap that?
Yeah, I would like to see this figure over time, because you have in the operating budget, if you look at the maintenance section, to replace 2 boilers at the upper elementary schools around 300,000. So that's 2 boilers. So we have another fund called the Special Education Expendable Trust Fund. That's in case we have an out-of-district placement come in that's very expensive. That can happen. In your smaller towns, it can really put a strain on them, and that sits at around $550,000 right now. I'd probably like to see this get up to around the same amount eventually. And then leave it there, and, you know, that would be our emergency fund.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, no further questions, observations, etc.? No? I'm going to continue the out-of-order sequence, and we will take up at the end of our deliberations here the motions on each of the moneyed articles. But we're going to move on now to Article 6. Shall the district raise and appropriate the sum of $325,076 for the purpose of pavement and drainage reconstruction in the parking lot area off School Street at James Mastrocola Elementary School and James Mastrocola Upper Elementary School. And this again was recommended by the school board vote of 5-0-0.
Thank you. You have a little pictorial in your... I didn't give you that? Oh, I'm sorry.
Happens to me all the time, Matt.
Yeah, I know. I'm not going to question Mrs. Heinrich, that's for sure. So, this is basically, and while it goes around, it'd be nice if Steve Keach were here. Some of you know him, some of you don't. But he's the engineer that we hired. Steve is president of Keach Nordstrom Associates. They're an excellent civil engineering firm. They do a lot of our work here. Steve is a Merrimack resident. His kids went through the system. He's an excellent individual, and he's an excellent engineer. And so we've been looking at this project on the capital improvement program for probably 4 or 5 years now, could be a little bit longer. But its time has come. You know, it's used to be on the right-hand side of the page, now it's on the left-hand side of the page. So what we want to do is, if you've ever been to Mastrocola Elementary School, the parking lot there is less than ideal. It's got cracks, the drainage is poor. It actually, a lot of it, as Steve pointed out last night, drains towards the building as opposed to away from the building. It's serviced by a catch basin that is supposed to funnel the water out of the parking lot that's probably around 10 inches wide in diameter. It cannot handle any of the storm water that's in there. When you have a deluge or some sort of constant rain, it can pond up in that area. Plus, it really doesn't lend itself to being the best use of space. So, given that those considerations, what Steve went to accomplish is one of the big issues is the entrance to the Smith Gym. If anybody has walked from the parking lot up to the triple doors where the Smith Gym is, you can look at that and you can tell that the grade is not ADA accessible. That is more than a 1 in 12 slope. That is not ADA accessible at all, as is the entrance to Mastrocola Elementary School. That is definitely not more than 1 in 12 slope. So what we would like to do, and what Steve has suggested, is, seeing the middle of the parking lot is so low, there's the opportunity to bring the parking lot up and create a positive flow of drainage away from the school, add some larger catch basins in critical spots, have them tie into the stormwater drainage system at the corner of Bishop and School Street, but we don't want to overwhelm the water going into Bishop and School Street where that drainage basin is, so we create couple of underground holding tanks to let the water fill up and then slowly come out, not to overwhelm that area, so you have a damp section. We also looked at the parking, and if you know the area, we're taking the parking and kind of flipping it 90 degrees. We gain around 20 parking spots there, which was a pretty good idea. In fact, myself, Tom Tussaud, of course, wherever I am, Tom is here too, you know, with everything like this. And Steve and Paul Chisholm, who actually drew up these plans with Steve, you know, supervising. One of the plans was to try and get some more spaces in there, and we invited Michelle Romaine, who came in, who had actually the idea of, how about we make the spaces the other way? And everybody started scratching their heads saying, you know, maybe that's going to work. So they started laying it out, and you still have a 24-foot wide circle around this entire area, which is the size of your standard roadway, 24 feet wide, 12 feet on each lane. And another thing we wanted to accomplish is to make the grades ADA accessible, so you could have a wheelchair go in the Smith Gym, have a wheelchair go in Mastrocola Elementary School. And then we wanted to bring some prominence to the entrance of Mastrocola Elementary School and the upper elementary school. And because it is kind of hidden. You drive into this parking lot, I don't know how many people I've met over there says, I can't find the school. I don't know where this school is. And they start going in this door and that door, and, you know, I go over and I meet them someplace like, where are you? I'm over here, I'm blowing my horn. And they finally come and find me, and I will walk them into the school. They just can't find it. So what we want to do is, by using different materials, some pavers in a different color, and you could see on this section over here, there are some pavers. They're going to give the area some recognition, some prominence. You're going to see a difference in texture as the asphalt goes away and the pavers start. And so that's going to tell the eye that there is indeed something different going on here. This does look like an entrance. The same thing with the upper elementary school, because right now when you drive in and you're in the church parking lot and you're walking, you know, you can see the entrance since we moved it from the other side of the building, but we want to give that some more prominence also, so you can really recognize by the change in materials using pavers either in a herringbone pattern or whatever they decide to do to give it some prominence and to show people exactly where the school was. I remember we had an issue at one of our school board meetings, and we had to call emergency services, and there was a police officer who ran across the street, and he was looking for the entrance of the school. He was a newer police officer, but he just couldn't find the entrance of the school. So hopefully this will take care of that. We also want to put a couple of islands where Master Cole Elementary School parking lot is, just to delineate that space. And in that area, we want to put some lighting, because that's a dark parking lot. If you're at a meeting, if you have your budget committee meeting over there, we've had school board meetings over there, at nighttime when you get out, you know, everything's just lit by some lights on the building. It's pretty dark. So what we want to do is put some LED light fixtures on poles in that area. So it's going to be a rather significant project. All the asphalt and everything's going to be dug up. There are, you know, Steve will say, and I know that for a fact, there's going to be some surprises once we get down there and we take away the top layer, because, you know, it was built a very long time ago. So we have a bit of a contingency in there in order to deal with that. So it'd be nice to get this parking lot functioning properly, the traffic flow functioning properly, the additional spaces, the additional lighting, getting rid of all the cracks, making the entrances more prominent and recognizable. So it's all part of a cohesive plan. We're just not doing a scratch coat and an overlay and calling it a day. It's all going to be re-engineered, so it'll be good for decades to come. So that's the Reader's Digest version of the Master Cole Elementary School and James Master Cole Upper Elementary School paving project. And Steve might be much better at this than I, but I think I tried to hit all his high points. If you want to learn anything else, there was a school board meeting last night. Towards the beginning of the meeting, Steve Keach does a presentation on this, and you'll be able to pick up a lot more information than what I just gave you here, but hopefully I captured some of what he said. So that's what this article is all about.
Questions from the board? Brian?
You mentioned a couple times that the existing pavement is pretty badly cracked, so from that I gather that repaving would be necessary in any circumstance of the parking lot, whether it's being redesigned or not?
Yes, correct.
Do you have an estimate of what the cost would be for only repaving without the re-engineering?
Just an overlay? No, I don't have that estimate.
Okay.
Yeah. I can try and find out.
I just wanted to get a rough idea of the paving has to be done anyway.
Yeah.
So in terms of the actual cost to the district of doing the redesign is some number less than the warrant article if we back out that cost that is going to be there no matter what we do.
Yes, okay, I understand.
Other questions from the board?
Would we be able to repave with it being out of ADA compliance, or we'd have to? We almost have to do this,
Once
right?
we get in there and we start moving dirt, we have to make those entrances ADA compliant.
Okay.
There's no way we could there's no way we could do an overlay and leave everything like it is being non-ADA compliant. We would have to comply.
Okay, so
And
this
that entails bringing up the grade in the center to get rid of the fishbowl effect.
So this is probably already pretty close to as cheap as we could do this, right?
It's an estimate that was done by Steve. He feels comfortable. If it passes, we're going to go out to bid and see where it brings us. But, you know, we're hoping that we can save some money on it. But this is like a cohesive plan that, once we get in there, we can't just, it would be difficult to just do a skim coat over everything and get rid of the cracks and not take care of the ADA. And once you're taking care of the ADA, then it's kind of like the book, if you give a moose a muffin, you know, he's going to want a cheese Danish or something like that. So it just kind of continues on. So that's why we thought of this as a cohesive project and just not an overlay, because that would stop us. We wouldn't be allowed to do that and leave it in the same condition.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions from the board? I'd like to make one final observation that this has been a very, very long time in the need of being done. And I think it clearly points to that in the engineering description of how inadequate it has been. But over and above the utility of taking care of these things, I think the school district has done a very good job of maintaining its facilities. We see that on the inside, certainly. But it's important that we create an invitation, a welcoming invitation to identify the entrance to our facilities and encourage people to come in. I know at my house we don't really use the front door very much, but we still like to think that we're welcoming, and I think that's an important quality for our school district facilities to have. We will move on now to Article 7? Oh, excuse me.
Yep.
Excuse me? The budget. Oh, excuse me. All right. At this time, we'll just take another short recess, and we'll be back shortly.
And thank you, Chuck, for taking over with the help of my wife. On the warrant articles, which, first of all, the numbers might not be the same come time for deliberative session because of potential warrant articles as such. What I would like to do is on the money warrant articles, and I'm not talking the operating budget, is we will vote on those next Tuesday night at our meeting before the public hearing as to whether to recommend or not recommend. That okay with everybody? We are now going to move on to the operating budget. And this is our work session. We have an operating budget currently of $77,654,036. That was presented to us by the school board and the administration. The default budget is $77,787,568. First of all, we do not vote on the default budget. We have nothing to do with it. So the number we're working with that becomes the Budget Committee's budget is the first number I mentioned. At this time, I will entertain Any quick questions you might have before we go into looking for motions for any adjustments? Are there any questions? Kevin?
It's not a question, but I think it's probably important that it gets explained on the record what the difference between the proposed budget and the default budget is for the new folks and anybody watching at home. Because there's a
Okay,
difference in
Matthew?
numbers and what happens if one gets passed versus, you know, that sort of thing, so.
Sorry. The difference is around 100 and, I should have this number, but I have it on another spreadsheet. So,
163,000, I think it is.
something like that.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean the difference in,
Yeah.
in numbers, but what
Oh,
is a,
What is the default?
right,
Okay,
I understand, I just wanted it
okay.
presented so that people can
So
follow along why we
the-
have two numbers.
The default budget is last year's budget with any modifications of a contractual nature, any obligations that we have legally as a school district, which would include providing services, providing proper building space, heat, lights, everything like that. It's reduced or increased by special warrant articles or contracts or bonded debt. I can tell you that last year's operating budget was $76,581,286. Then I have a series of adjustments. I'll go through those. There was a warrant article to put $150,000 in capital reserve. I took that out of the default budget, so that's a negative. There was the purchase of Brentwood, the red building. That was $275,000, so I took that out of last year's budget. That's another negative. There are benefits. When we last sat together and we were talking about the district budget, I said between health insurance, New Hampshire retirement, FICA, everything like that, the increase in benefits was around $1.7 million. So those are contractual obligations that I have to provide. So that is an increase. There is a decrease in professional development for the SRO. That was a one-time expenditure that we had, so that was taken out. And these are all things that when we take something out that are not likely to reoccur in succeeding budgets. Driver education, it's basically a wash anyway. There's revenue coming in, revenue going out. That was decreased by $43.70, so that's a reduction. Transportation, we have 3.5% increase. That's an increase of $79,454, so that's an increase. When we did the kindergarten, full-day kindergarten warrant article, it was broken up into salaries for staff, which went in the default budget, and then it was broken down into around $69,000 worth of kindergarten furniture. That was done for a reason, so I could extract the $69,000 in kindergarten furniture from the default budget, so that gets taken away. There was $11,591 at MES, $23,183 at Reed's, Thornton's Ferry, $34,775. So that was gone. Debt service, our debt service has gone down by $53,000, so that's a negative. Contracted salaries, the contracts for support staff and administrators that have multi-year agreements, they are in the budget. And there are also 3 teaching positions that are removed from the 1920 budget. So the net of those two, because I have to put the contractual increases in, and then this year, because it's a change in the law, because we actually reduced the budget by 3 positions, I had to take those 3 positions out. That was approximately $200,000. So the net effect was an increase in wages of only $150,000. So that was an increase. So administrators with a multi-year agreement, support staff with a multi-year agreement, and then taking out the 3 positions that were riffed in the budget at the elementary schools. So that was the net of that. There's the utilities for Brentwood. It's a new facility. We have to throw heat and lights and everything like that in it. So I added that in. There was paving at Thornton's Ferry. Yeah, it seems so long ago. It was done last summer. It seems like it was years ago. But yeah, we redid the parking lot at Thornton's Ferry Elementary School. The circle, which was pretty bad, and that was $214,000 because it was a warrant article, much like Article 6 is. I took that out of the default budget. And then in the maintenance budget, as you remember, and this seems like so long ago too, we put in the PFOA filtration systems for all the schools. And that was kind of, in my estimation, my viewpoint, a one-time expense not likely to reoccur in the future. So that was $128,590, so that was taken out. Food service is an obligation that we have to provide, and it's a wash, it's an in and an out, so there was an increase in food service of $17,000. And special ed, after I look at all the ins and the outs and the ebbs and the flows of that, increased by around $68,000, which doesn't include all the salary positions that I talked about previously. So when you take all those together, you get, and there's a line item version of this online right now when you go, and I think it's at the back of your books, it shows the number 77,787,568, because there's another new law where I have to disclose this at the deliberative session, and I have to have a line item version. So the last part of your budget book has a line item version, it's around 36 pages, of the 2018-2019 budget, all the changes, and then the line items that are contained in the 2019-2020 default budget. But that's a lot of pages to go through at that time, and so I just have this summary, which I'll post up online too. So that's basically the difference between the default budget and the operating budget. When we first came in to present this budget, it was over the default budget by around $333,000. You got that sheet last time we were together. The board made certain modifications and changes, excuse me, to get us below default budget, so that's where we're at right now. So it's nothing magic, it's nothing, behind closed doors or anything like that. It's all done out in the open. We were above default. Board took action to bring us below default on purpose, with the purpose of ensuring that the budget did pass. So that's
All
my
set?
explanation of the default budget. Sorry I went so fast.
Any other questions? Brian?
So as I understand it, one of the issues that some people have is the default budget being higher than the standard budget, and feeling like it's the voter doesn't have a lot of choice because the default budget is higher if they vote down the operating budget. So as I understand the reason for that, the default budget is highly prescribed by RSA and Department of Revenue Administration, and the lower operating budget reflects the work of the school board and the administration to actually level fund or cut wherever possible in order to control budget growth year over year. Do I understand that correctly?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
Carol, do you have anything? Any questions?
No, I'm all set.
Okay. Chuck?
I'd just like to point out for the Budget Committee that as direct as all this information is, there are some sublime suggestions as well. And I am told that our budget books are what's known as Grinch green.
Well, thank you, Chuck. Seeing no other questions, at this time, we will open up the floor for adjustments to the budget. Are there any deductions that anybody would like to propose to the budget? Seeing none. Are there any additions that anybody would like to propose to the budget? Mr. Mower?
I would like to propose adding $200,000 to the budget for the express purpose of providing the money necessary to raise the public nuisance known as the Brentwood property and make the lot available for further consideration for the district.
And I will second your motion. So please go and speak to it.
I realize...
I'm sorry, I am going to interrupt you. What this will entail, we would be creating a new line in the budget for the demolition of that building. Matt will have to assign an account number to it at some point in time, should this addition pass the Budget Committee. Post time. Sorry about that.
Oh.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Okay. I don't mean to be indelicate in all of the deliberations that have taken place since last year in the acquisition of the property, and where we are at this point where the school board has handed this off as something not appropriate for this budget cycle without any real understanding as to why. If many of you will recall, I took some esteemed position relative to that facility. It strikes me that almost everybody I know, and I realize I don't know a lot of people in the town of Merrimack, but those that I do seem to definitely want that building gone. They recognize that it is not something that can be rehabilitated, certainly not without, some punishing and unnecessary costs associated with it. There is no practical purpose to that building as it exists now. We bought the property for a variety of different reasons. You can ask the number of voters that voted, and they will all tell you a different reason why they purchased it. But it is now in the hands of the school district, and it is incumbent and prudent upon us to be taking care of it, that it does not create a public nuisance. And that is what that building is. It is a public nuisance. There is little value, as I can see, in keeping the utilities associated with it. We're not using the building. We can't use the building. I have not heard the final report yet that was undertaken by the school board at another considerable expense. But it tells us what we all readily know. In this day and age, we cannot just cope together some old, if you'll excuse me, Jimmy Bigwood, wherever you are, conglomeration of buildings that were built in a different age for a different purpose and simply cannot serve us today in any practical sense, in any assurance by the insurance industries or other administrative parties that are responsible for the safety and the welfare of the town of Merrimack. And I think that any time that we allow this to continue to fester, where, quite frankly, half-baked ideas might yet arise, I think it's time for us to do what we all know needs to be done to lend clarity and purpose to that property, something that the school board as yet has not demonstrated to us. And I am here to suggest that we can, in fact, do this by supporting the school district in providing the prudent amount of money to properly raise that building and prepare it for further consideration at some point in the future by the school district. I assure you I could go on at greater length, but I would prefer to hear responses from my fellow board members.
Thank you, Chuck. Matt, the $200,000, that's what you got for an approximate figure to demolish the building and take care of all the things with disposal?
We could do it for that.
Okay.
I said 250,000 before. That was an estimate from a local contractor. Once we bid it out, and plus I've got the utilities hanging in the budget, I could cobble those together and we could probably make it happen.
Okay.
Mhm.
I'm going to express my personal opinion. I'm very much in favor of putting this line item in the budget and having it executed. Based on the costs that have been bantered around, based on the rotten condition of the building, and based on the fact that I personally believe people who voted to buy this property were buying the property. We weren't buying the wood and the roofing on top of it for its aesthetic value. And I think the sooner we get rid of it, the safer it will be, and we don't have to banter around the idea of, well, what if we do this, or what if we do that? The building is not rehabable. You're going to spend more money to rehab it than it's worth considering, and you're still going to end up with a junky building, and it's not going to service our needs. And could be used, that spot, for a new superintendent's office? Yeah, it could. Could redesign the whole area there and do a different configuration entirely. But if we get rid of it, that's a good move, as opposed to boarding it up, which we heard about earlier, which means it's an abandoned building. That causes even more problems. Comments or questions about this motion? Let's see.
I have one, Stan.
Okay, Carol, hold on just a moment.
Yep.
David?
So I'm all for raising it, but why would this be an operating budget item as opposed to a warrant article? We bought the building on a warrant article. This isn't part of our everyday kind of.
The budget committee can't create a warrant article.
We can't
But I'm
create it
wondering
as a...
why we would put this in the budget. This isn't something that would be a year-to-year thing.
No, it doesn't have to be. It could be a one-time expense and be in the operating budget. It also, by putting it in the operating budget, should it be less or a little more, Matt can work with the additional money he saves from the electricity and gas and all of that, and it gives the opportunity for the school board to do the right thing and say, yeah, let's get rid of this building now. If 25 citizens made a petitioned warrant article to demolish the building, and that warrant article did not pass, and something happened to the building, we could not demolish it at that point until another school district meeting, because no would mean no. If it's in the operating budget, it can get done with the money that's there. Now, that's not to say the school board does not have to do it. They would have the money to do it. I will point out back a few years, this committee added money for a roof at the middle school. School board decided, now we're not gonna spend the money and do it. And what happened? They ended up doing it for a lot more money. So I believe that's why the operating budget's a good place to put this. When we did the, as I remember, did we put the maintenance building on a separate warrant article or not? I thought that was
It
in
was
the operating.
275,000. I think it was a separate warrant
It
article,
was?
yeah.
For
Yeah.
a separate building?
Yeah,
But I mean, this is demolishing, so.
right. That was a actual construction project, so,
But this is to get rid of it,
yeah.
which would be an operating type expense. And it
Operation
would come
maintenance
out,
plan,
it
yeah.
obviously, in the following year, would come out of, it's not gonna be in the default budget.
No, it wouldn't, because it's
Okay.
not likely, we're not gonna wreck it
Yeah, I don't think you're
twice.
gonna demolish it a second
Right.
time.
Not if it's done correctly, at least.
Yeah, well, that's why it's so expensive. All set, David?
Yeah.
Kevin?
Thanks. Chuck, I agree with much of what you said there, but I think I'm uncomfortable with this. I feel like last year, the red building, whatever we call it, was proposed. It was purchased, in my mind, without much of a plan, at least without a public plan. Perhaps there's a plan in somebody's head. And I feel like if we were to spend another $200,000 to knock it down without a plan, I'm not comfortable. It's a big number. I'm not saying it doesn't need to be knocked down, but I think somebody, and I guess that's the school board, should have a plan for what are we going to do with this before we spend $200,000 on top of it. That we're almost at $500,000 with no plan, and I'm not comfortable with that.
Well, there's been a plan of putting a superintendent special student services building there when it became available, as being closer and easier to do because it's right by, it has a gas line in it and it has a sewer line.
That was not part of the official plan. It was not part of the warrant article to buy that building to build
No,
a
it was not.
superintendent's office. It was to buy the building, to your point, to buy the property. That's what you said. that
To buy the property.
Sure. So to my point, there's no official plan that's out there that says we were going to buy it for $275, knock it down for $200, and then spend, I don't know, millions to build a new building. I don't disagree that we need a new superintendent building. Those facilities are awful. But there's no plan, and we just keep spending money, so I'm not comfortable with that.
Well, even if you turn it into just a parking lot, you could get away with it. But, okay. Carol, you're next.
I'm left with feeling like there are no good choices here. I don't really feel comfortable putting it in the operating budget because I don't feel like the average resident, taxpayer, voter, whatever you want to refer to them as, really knows what's in the operating budget. So they're voting on a number, and very few of them really know whether the demolition of the red building is in there or not. So I sort of feel like there's a lack of transparency by doing it that way. So my gut is leaning towards I'd like to see somebody bring it forward as a petitioned warrant article. However, Stan raises valid concerns that if we put it forward as a warrant article and it fails, then we can't do it no matter what. So that's a valid concern against doing it. And the third option of either leaving it as is and paying for the utilities or turning everything off and boarding it up, to me is throwing money away. So I don't like any of the options. At the minute, and I'm not firmly convinced of this, but my inclination right now would be to vote against it being in the operating budget and to support it if somebody brought forward a petitioned warrant article, because I feel like then the voters know what they're voting on, and I also feel like it stands a better chance of the school board actually doing it as opposed to like that prior roof that Stan referred to. We put the money into the operating budget and the school board just kind of ignores it and we raise the taxes only to return it to the taxpayers the next year, which doesn't seem like a very productive use of anybody's time and money. So right now I'm leaning towards warrant article or nothing, but I'm not firmly fixed in that opinion.
Okay. Jordan?
I'm listening to all of it, and all of this makes sense to me, but the reality is, from a practical standpoint, this building cannot be used as is. We went through this, I think, at the last meeting. Matt, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? We walked through the fact that everything about this building, the condition of it, the lack of compliance with ADA, this building cannot be used as is.
Absolutely.
And so, from a practical standpoint, the last thing that anybody wants to do is have an eyesore, but from a more realistic standpoint, from a cost perspective, the last thing anybody wants to do is put money into this building to keep it connected to gas and water so that we don't even use it. So, while I agree that we all may not know what the plan is here, we all do know that one of the reasons this property was bought was to look at putting an administrative building. And quite frankly, I would much rather right now raise that building is not going to get used. It's not going to get used in a year or 3 years. So I'd rather, while we figure out what we're going to do about an administration building, I would rather raise this thing, not put any money into keeping it up, and at the very worst, use it as parking. We have a parking problem here. Every day I drive into the high school, there's cars parked all up and down, was it McElwain? O'Gara. There's high school kids parked all over in the street. It's a mess. So at the very worst, you use it for a parking lot, and you give more parking to the high school. But the question that I really have, and Naomi, I would just defer to you as to why was this not put into the budget by the school board? Is it because there were bigger fish to fry with the budget? And how do you feel about us now putting this in as something to be included? And let me one more point to Carol's. Carol said, and I don't disagree that that the public may not know every line of what's in a budget, but in a town of over 20,000 people, there is no one here from the public tonight. So we need to take those of us that are here and investing our time and energy into this committee, we need to make the best decisions we can on behalf of the town. If there was anybody here tonight or at any of our meetings saying, hey, here's what I think, then I would listen to that. But there's an apathy in the community. So we need to do what we think is best, whether or not the public knows every line of a $77 million budget. So Naomi, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Naomi, go ahead.
Well, there are a couple of pieces to this. The first is this conversation is very heartening because from a personal perspective, and I think in general, the sense that that building will need to be replaced is growing hourly if it didn't exist from the beginning. That said, it's contentious. It's contentious in the broader community. There have been many suggestions as to whether or not it is going too quickly, whether or not it's transparent or not, when and where the conversations are happening. And so I think that the decision was made, rightly or wrongly, that to bring it to this year's budget would be faster than the community would be comfortable with. And that we needed to go through a process where people could see we had looked at all the ideas that are held close to their heart and chosen the one that made the most sense. That said, it doesn't sound like there's much difference of opinion here, which is nice to hear because it means that might be a misreading of the community, which is nice to know. My main perspective and my main concern on this is what it does to the overall budget, because there's been a great deal of effort and care put into coming in under the default budget, and this would put us over the default budget. That means that we want to take the calculated risk as to whether that means we will get the default budget based on that item. And that is certainly something each person can have their own opinion on, but in this climate, I think it's a possibility that that would happen.
I'm going to let Brian go next.
I was thinking exactly what Naomi just said about the risk of the operating budget coming in over the default budget with this modification. And I think I'm in agreement with everyone else that if this was a warrant article, I would wholeheartedly support that warrant article. I think it would be a very big roll of the dice to do this without looking for potentially taking some of the cuts which were reinstated previously and revisiting some of those cuts to offset the cost in order to keep the operating budget below the default budget, or at least on par with the default budget. But I think that if the operating budget is 100,000 over the default budget, that's a huge risk that the entire thing fails.
One of the things I would just like to point out, with the money not being spent on all of the utilities and everything else, you're going to end up with about the same number.
Understood, but there are going to be a significant number of voters who are going to look at the bottom line number, and regardless of the logic behind the rest of it, what that bottom line number is matters for a lot of people and how they're going to make their decision and vote. So fully understanding the logic, that's why I'm saying that as if it were a warrant article, it makes perfect sense. Get it out of the way. Otherwise, 10 years from now, we will have just spent the money keeping the building warm so that it doesn't collapse, that it'll cost to demolish it now. So just get it done with. But unless there are going to be other adjustments made to offset a substantial portion of the cost, it seems like a big, big gamble that the entire operating budget gets voted down.
I would respectfully disagree, but, you know, I think we sometimes pay too much attention to wanting our budget under the default budget. It seems like to be some magical number. And, well, you know, that's nice, but it also, different things suffer. There also may be, you know, maybe just adding, I'm just trying to think out of the box, maybe adding a line in the budget that Matt would have to create the budget number for, and putting $1 in it. At least there's a line there that allows them to do that if they have the money to do it next year. If you don't add the whole 200,000. Because I'm not sure if, and Matt, maybe you can lend a little guidance on this. If we did not add this line in the budget, would you still be able to demolish that building next year if you had to? Or because you didn't have that purpose, you wouldn't be able to?
Well, when you do the MS-27, MS-22, the
Right.
report of appropriations voted, it's broken down by function code. So you have a big function code that says regular education, and that's everybody, all your teachers, everything like that. Then you have special education. Then you have another line that says operation of maintenance and plant. So if there would be a situation that would arise that we would have to do that because of certain circumstance, we could do it because we have that larger item that is maintenance of operation and plant. So it's
So it would still be
it
legal to do
would still be
it?
legal to do, yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay. Chuck, you were next.
I almost don't know quite where to follow up, because it was a very simple and direct motion for a very simple and finite undertaking. It has a way of expanding into people's kitchen table issues and school board balancing, budget cycles, and so forth. I want to inject a little reality here. I've been around a while. That doesn't make me smarter than anybody else, but it's going to give you some idea of why I feel the way I do. I'm a native of this town. I've seen the schools grow from one room that took every kid in town to what we have today. I've been on the budget committee here, the school board budget committee, or the school budget committee, for 2 seasons. I have been a school board member. I have been a budget committee member. I have served on the Board of Selectmen. I have served as a library trustee. I have been thoroughly involved in the participation of my civic responsibilities, which are different from my kitchen table responsibilities. This is a municipal corporation. It's not a question of, oh, gee, this, or oh, gee, that, or why don't we let the voters decide? People get elected to provide leadership and to provide fiduciary responsibilities to those positions. I know how easy it is to get lost in the fog and the mist. I've been there many times myself. But the truth of the matter is, we have been school budget defaulting ourselves to death here for the last 10 years. Now, we're all on the budget committee. We know what these books provide. We know how costs go up, and we all shake our head. Oh my God, transportation costs are up. Oil costs are up. Pavement costs are up. Oh, insurance costs are up. Education? Is education up? No. Education isn't up. We haven't increased our educational initiatives and services in this district, according to our budget books, for the last 8 years. But we worry about, whether somebody's going to cobble together an old chicken coop called the Brentwood property, or, we better put this in as a warrant article because, quite frankly, we don't want to be responsible if it doesn't pass. And yet, the school board is tasked with the responsibility for the vision and the advancement and the prudential expenditures. And yet, we tend not to really participate in those things. We tend to put it off because it's more comfortable for us to put it off. Let the voters decide. Why would you let the voters decide on something that you were elected to follow some representative vision on? I mean, I got elected to the budget committee. I assume nobody must have known what they were doing when they voted for me, because here I am, talking about the reality of where we are. There's so many things we need to do in this district, and we're afraid to do them. We are afraid to do them, including educational initiative. What do we want for the future of our community? Do we want to go on in this miasma year after year after year of, oh, well, we need a new super accelerator that broke off of the Canute valve that wasn't really installed correctly, but we didn't have a capital reserve program for, and all of these kinds of things constantly. No, that is not what leadership is about. And in this case, the voters said they wanted to buy this property. That's what they said they wanted to do. So we did. And now we know the naked truth of this property, the absolute naked truth. It is an albatross around our neck. And it will continue to be an albatross around our neck until we take the straightforward position of demolishing it so that it is a useful property for us to take advantage of some point in the future. But it just adds to our difficulties. I don't understand why we just don't put a tourniquet on it. I proposed this motion so that it was very clear and very transparent Get rid of this thing, and you have the money to do it. If you choose not to do it, well, that's another thing. That's not my responsibility. You know, you can address the voters on why you're not going to actually take care of that when you had the money to do it. Because I know for a fact, if we defeat this motion and we don't put this in the operating budget, this will again signal confusion to the voters, to the school board, to the administration, and as I predicted even before we bought this property, all of this is going to be the albatross around our neck. It surely is. We got rid of the bats because we had to get rid of the bats. I'm suggesting that we spend the money in the operating budget to do what we know absolutely needs to be done. Absolutely needs to be done. And I can't even imagine how long we can get away with having a public nuisance over there on that property. I know if it were the case at my house, there'd probably be a petitioned warrant article to tear my entire property down. Public institutions are a little different. But that's where we are. We need to do this. We need to make the finances available to do this, and if someone chooses not to do it, they certainly can't say that they didn't have the financial wherewithal, they didn't have somebody supporting that decision. They're going to have to find a different reason not to do something with something that is a pig in a poke, and it's going to poke us forever until we put the money where our mouths are to get rid of it. I guess I've said enough.
Anyone else? Amanda?
So I think there's been a lot of really good points, and I agree that the building would probably be in the best interest to just be raised. I think that by putting this line into the operating budget, that ultimately we're looking out for the best interest of Merrimack's residents' money, because by giving the money and providing it for consideration and having it available, it could be done at most cheapest, and we're saving money in the long run. I agree that this building is probably just going to be a money pit staying there. We're paying utilities. We are going to have to board it up or do something with it. It's going to cost more to remodel it to make it usable than just to tear it down and rebuild it. And so I think it's going to be in the taxpayers' best interest to do this now rather than let it sit for who knows how many years and spend more money later on to raise it when we could do it now for less money. And so I do think that this would be in the best interest of people's money to add this to the warrant article or the budget.
Naomi?
I think it might be important to insert that it is on the capital improvement plan for the coming year. So it isn't something that doesn't have a place for an indeterminate length of time. I want to say that while appreciating that part of the purpose of this motion is to light a fire under it that would be even faster than that, and that certainly is an appreciated sentiment, but it is not something that is intended or that the plan is to let sit for any length of time.
Carol, do you have anything else to add?
Not specifically, but in general, is there any mechanism, if we do not add this to the operating budget, is there any mechanism by which we could strongly urge the school board to consider, if they have the money, rather than spending it on utilities for that building, to use the money to tear it down?
You could have 5,000 people calling and say they do that. It doesn't mean they got to do it. It still won't mean they have to do it if we give them the money. But
Right.
if we're giving the guidance and direction, and I think that unless some people would come to the deliberative session and try and make their recommendation that the money not be in the budget, then I think that's a good sign, especially if they vote for the budget. Whether it be above or below the default budget.
I'm not as concerned as some of the people about being above or below the default budget, because the reality is, if people vote against the operating budget, we get the default budget, which is a larger number as of right now. And so we essentially get everything that was in this operating budget. So I don't see it as a catastrophe if the operating budget were voted down. I just don't like raising money for an operating budget when I get the sense the school board is not likely to spend it. And I would sure like to find a way to exert more pressure on them to make this item much more urgent than it seems to be at present.
Unfortunately, we don't have that ability, because even if you have a warrant article, a special warrant article, petitioned warrant article, and the school board doesn't want to spend the money for it, it doesn't get done.
That's true.
And the money lapses and goes back. So the 5 school board members are the ones that get the final say as to whether the building gets torn down or not. But I think it's something that's, personally, that's worth doing. And, yeah, I know it was put in the capital reserve, the capital improvement plan, but, you know, let's face it, that's a magical ball that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. And it doesn't have to be done, and it could get kicked down the road farther. And for the minuscule amount of this money that it costs to do it, and what would be saved in utility costs, ends up being about a wash. And I think it's a fairly good move. You all set, Carol?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, Brian?
So actually, I have a couple of questions for Matt. So this would end up falling under the maintenance department's budget, correct?
Yes, correct.
So in the potential cuts that were proposed, the window replacements at Reed's Ferry and Thornton's Ferry were both proposed and then were taken out of the cuts, correct? If those had been cut, they would have also gone into the capital improvement plan, or they would have simply been cut?
They simply would have been cut,
Okay,
because each individual project is under $100,000, so,
okay.
yeah.
What would be the impact of taking those out this year to offset the cost of demolition for the red building and then putting them back in next year?
Well, that's still in the maintenance of operation and plant, and the board could still decide to do the windows at Thornton's and Reed's. And seeing that it was their decision to put that back in, I would think they would probably give us a directive to do so.
So in interest of maintaining something close to the bottom line, I would propose that recommending taking the window replacements out of the operating budget while adding the demolition cost into the operating budget, leaving the bottom line relatively close to where it was, largely offsetting the extra cost.
Well, the first thing we have to do is vote on Chuck's
Okay.
motion before we can take on another
Okay.
motion. What do you mean? No, he was originally, first of all, make sure your mic's on. What he's talking about is making another motion to cut the money for window replacement out of the budget
Yeah, but
in order to fund this.
I don't want to speak for you, but you're saying your vote on the demolition would be based on the vote to cut the windows, potentially.
So I would be curious to hear other people's feedback. If other members of the committee have feedback on that idea, particularly people who are nervous about putting this in the operating budget, if that would allay any of your concerns, potentially moving to amend the motion or submitting it as a second motion, I'm putting forward an idea. Does anybody have any feedback on that?
Can I say something, Stan?
Go ahead, Carol.
I applaud the creativity of the idea, but in the end, I don't think it buys us anything, because the reality is the bottom line of the budget is what the school board is handed to work with, and they can make the decision whether they want to spend it on demolishing the red building or whether they want to spend it on replacing the windows. So at the end of the day, adding it in one place and subtracting it in another place, I'm not sure really accomplishes anything. I suppose it makes the point a slightly more obvious point when they see what we cut, that where our priorities lay, but I'm not sure it really accomplishes much.
Okay. Kevin?
Brian, I too appreciate the creativity. I guess my perspective is that I think it's more important to maintain buildings that are in use, like Reed's Ferry, which is full of hundreds of students and staff, including my wife. I'll note the windows need to be replaced, and those are assets that we can't afford to go into disrepair. So I would be hesitant to move money from there to knock down a building that I think we agree needs to be knocked down. So.
Stan, I may have just had an idea.
Okay. Go ahead.
What about, and I don't have the numbers, but you've been saying that the amount of the utilities is somewhere close to the amount of demolition. If that's accurate, what about if we add in the $200,000 and then we
No,
make
that's
second
not accurate.
motion?
That's not correct. I would stand corrected on that in terms of the amount of money, but
Okay.
it would offset some of the money.
How much? I mean, a small dent or a big
It was
chunk?
last week. It was like $12,000 in utilities, or somewhere around there, 12 to 15.
Yeah, we
Matt,
put- it was basic stuff to keep the building from
it was not
freezing.
$200,000. Right.
Okay, I have the figures right here. Let's see. 2,000 water and sewer, 8,500 gas, 10,000 electric, $2,500 oil. So that's the.
About 25 grand.
22,000.
20, yeah.
22,000.
Uh-huh.
All right, that kills my idea, so all right, never mind.
Plus, don't you pay additional insurance on that building, too?
We've added it to our policy. It didn't really affect our schedule of values, so,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. I think so. Would you say it's not worth it?
If it didn't affect, yeah, it's not worth anything if our insurance rate didn't go up. So.
Yeah, it's like taking your car to a certain dealer and they'll give you $2,000 whether you tow it or drive it in. Yes, go ahead.
Naomi, Matt too, is there a plan to have a plan?
Yeah.
Yes. More to the point. I would have liked to see it move faster than it has. I think the entire board would like to have seen it move faster. To some extent, once the decision was made that it would not be in this year's budget, the budget itself took priority over those conversations. But the goal has always been to move this thing forward. Nobody wants to have a building sitting there indefinitely or even for another year.
Well, because I guess my point would be, if we raise it with a plan for the future, there could be considerable savings on that end?
I can't predict that, but that was another thing that was in my mind. I do not know whether rolling the cost of demolition into the cost of construction would yield benefits. I like to think so, but I don't know. Maybe Matt would.
Well, if you're going to bond it, depending upon the interest rates, and I don't see the interest rates, well, I can't predict the future, obviously, but it would be something that you could roll into the cost of the new construction. It would just delay everything, maybe a month or whatever, the cost of, to demolish and take the building away. I think it's always been the intent of the board to look at that site as a location, as a new central office, consider it strongly. I've had some plans drawn up that fits a new building on that site. It's a prime location. So it all depends how one wants to approach things. I know the board has talked about looking at our bonded debt schedule. And, you keep hearing me say, in 2023 or whatever it is, we're going to lose, let's say, the high school addition, which is the 3-story piece over here. That's going to go away. That's going to free up maybe $300,000 in another year or two. So there could be a plan to look at that in conjunction with building a new building and feather in some new debt where debt is leaving us, as to not make a spike or anything. That could be what people are thinking about.
Anybody else? The motion on the floor is to add $200,000 to the operating budget for the purpose of demolishing the red building. On money warrant articles, we always vote with a roll call vote, but we have to vote with a roll call vote anyway because we have Carol on the line. So, Mrs. Heinrich, would you please do the roll call vote?
Mrs. Lang.
Opposed.
Mr. Stisser.
In favor.
Mr. French.
In favor.
Mr. Elk.
Opposed.
Ms. Schoenfeld.
Opposed.
Mr. Gualiumi.
In favor, tear it down.
Mr. Mower.
I tear her tattered ensign down. That's a yes.
Mr. Bobbit.
No.
Ms. Heidelberger.
I am in favor.
Mr. Heinrich.
Yes.
Six in favor, 4 opposed.
Motion passes. We have now added $200,000 to the operating budget, bringing it up to $77,854,036. Are there any other adjustments to the budget? Hearing or seeing no hands, hearing no voices and seeing no hands, I will move, for the purpose of the public hearing next week, that we recommend an operating budget of $77,854,036. Do I have a second? seconded by Mr. Moa. Any discussion? And this is to go to the public hearing. You will also have another opportunity to vote on the operating budget after the public hearing. All right, Mrs. Heinrich, got to do the roll call vote one more time.
I'm going to abstain, please.
In favor.
Stan, can I interrupt for a second? Maybe I didn't hear something. I have no clue what we're voting on right now.
We're voting on the operating budget to be brought to the public hearing.
Okay.
It's $77,854,036.
Okay.
Okay?
I think I just missed something in the phone for a second.
Okay. Sorry, Pat.
Yes.
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 Motion to recommend is 901. That is, that will be the number that will be presented at the public hearing next Tuesday night. Speaking of that, you will have your opportunity between 7 and 7:30 to propose any other adjustments to the budget. We also, at that point in time, will vote on the other moneyed warrant articles, whether to recommend or not recommend. Our votes, we can change them after the public hearing, but at least we have something for the public hearing to go forward with. We also will be doing minutes, hopefully between 7 and 7:30. We'll start the meeting, recess it at 7:30, go into the public hearing, conclude the public hearing, reconvene our meeting, take our final votes, and then we will be done. And hopefully we
Dan,
won't.
have you considered, if you're doing minutes during that first section, you'll have me on the phone, which makes you have to do roll call votes?
Yeah, that's fine, we can do that.
All right.
We also, we might not get to the minutes till after the public hearing. And part of the problem is, part of the problem is, we have a yet-to-be-received moneyed warrant article for this, for the turf.
Yeah.
And it's unknown right now as to whether it's going to be a bonded warrant article or a regular straight-up warrant article. If it's a bonded article, they got until the 8th of February to turn it in. If it's not bonded, they got till 5 o'clock on the 12th. And even at that, it has to be certified by the school district clerk that the voters who signed the petition are all legal. And then again, we might not even get one. So that's going to put a monkey wrench into things where we might start discussing that warrant article, go to the public hearing, then close the public hearing, and end up voting on it afterwards. So that's the general plan. I would also like to remind everybody, and I'll remind again next week, some of you are up for election and re-election. Just to let you know, Lee would be up for election. Amanda is up for re-election. Carol is up for election. I am up for election, re-election. Carol's up for re-election. And Brian will be up for election. And should you choose to run for Budget Committee, you do have to fill out a piece of paperwork again. I am told the school district clerk will have forms with her next week in case you want to sign up early. Or you can get the form out, but you can't sign it, you can't turn it in, right? 8 a.m., 20th, after, right. But you can hand out forms early. Can't you? Oh, well. No, she is not. She doesn't, her term doesn't expire until 2021. At this time, we have public participation. And again, everybody's disguised as a blue seat. But I will also take the opportunity, is there any of the members of the administration want to say anything to the Budget Committee? You're all good? Now we come to other. Is there anything other we need to discuss this evening? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Do you want to do that, Stan, with me on the phone?
Oh, yeah, wait a minute. Good night, Carol.
Good night.
Bye, Ginger.
See you all next Tuesday, 7 o'clock. Same bad time, same bad channel. Now I'll take the motion to adjourn. Motion and seconded. Kevin and Lee. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? None. That was unanimous. We are adjourned. Thank you all, and good night, everybody.
They won't be,
They won't be empty.
They won't be empty.
You
They'll-
won't have enough, I can tell you that
there-
now.
There will be a price point where those spaces will be
That's right.
fully subscribed to.
Yeah, I would believe that. Thank you for that question, though, Paul. Any other comments or questions? Okay, then it's the, okay, sorry, Tom.
Where you talked about parking behind the section, number 6, Executive Park Drive, that's getting really close to your property line, and I can't tell from these plans, the elevations and whatnot. So if you can get us some better information on what, whether those neighbors are higher up than you, or and you're gonna be looking, headlights into